Glad, awesome. Thank you so much. I love the vibe already. And that's the best part, just the vibe, because I see this as a space where I can connect and just be transparent and speak as a school counselor of color to my fellow school counselors of color. It's so awesome just to have this kind of space. And so I'm excited. Keep sharing in there where you're from because I love and once COVID releases, I'm excited to travel. And so, what's up to the Philly people? I'm actually my uncle's out in Philly, so I'm excited to try to go visit him soon. My family's from Philly area and Virginia area, so Philly folks, I'm hoping to be out there soon. So let's dive into this. Let's get going. Excited y'all are here. My name is Derek Francis. I'm the manager of counseling services for Minneapolis Public Schools. Today, we're going to be talking about supporting students at their major race or bias incident. So important to prepare yourselves for this type of work. And as school counselors, prepare yourself for how you're going to be there for students in the case of that happening. So a little bit about me. I'm passionate about cross-cultural connections with students, staff, colleagues. The model for Minneapolis Public Schools is being comprehensive, equity-based, and proactive. And we really strive to do real racial reconciliation work, real race inclusion in our content. I'm gonna share about that throughout today. And then also, I've been a school counselor, just finished year 8. And so I was at a North High School in Minneapolis, and then I was at Champlain Park High School. You'll hear more about that. And then I've been the lead counselor and now manager of counseling services for Minneapolis schools. So go ahead and share where you're from. If you're high school level, middle school level, elementary, in your city or state, definitely let's utilize the chat. This is a space for us to connect too. So as we're sharing things throughout the session, if there's things you're interested, let this be our space to get ourselves connected. This is our affinity space. And when I say our, I'm talking about people of color. I know there's definitely people that are white that are in on here. Welcome to as well. And so I'm excited for us to go ahead and do this up. Man, bless the middle school counselors. I don't know how y'all do it. I've always been high school, and I love the high school age group. So just as we enter this, I think it's important for us to have our mindsets ready for this presentation. I think it's really important that you are aware of yourself because we're about to do a lot of self-reflection and practice reflection. And so I think it's really important that we know how we're coming into this. And so we're coming into this to be stretched. I don't want you to come to professional development where you're not going to be a little bit uncomfortable. Just like we push our white colleagues to grow and be uncomfortable in conversations around race and being proactive, I'm pushing us all to keep growing and stay accountable too, so that we're doing that work. All right, so we need to make sure we see this as a learning space. We're here to learn, we're here to grow. And then also, and so I say that because just because we're people of color doesn't mean that we don't have stuff we need to work on too when it comes to addressing race and bias and supporting students and families. We need to prepare ourselves for the craziness of navigating race incidents at schools. You're here for a reason. Some of you are still on summer break. So you could be out hanging out at your friend's house, at the beach, at the cabin, on the boat, grilling, at brunch, whatever have you, but you're here on purpose. And so this is important. You're here. This is for you. I'm speaking to you as a fellow school counselor of color. This is our affinity space. And so I invite you to be vulnerable. I'm going to share vulnerably things that I need to work on because we have to all keep growing. I haven't arrived just because I have this position or I'm a person of color. I have to grow. Who else can I support? And so that's how we have to see it. And so that's the piece. We got to be vulnerable, do some of that self-reflection, but then also let's be proactive. Let's do something different because you came and saw this today. That's the key piece. I'm going to give it to you straightforward because I care about you. I really see this as if we're a team together, as if we all, I'm speaking to you all like I would speak to the school counselors of color in Minneapolis when I'm working with them. I want us to build that kind of relationship today. So here's some of our goals for the session. We're going to learn some strategies to comprehensively support students, staff, and family members cross-culturally, all different backgrounds. Next, we're going to reflect on our own personal unconscious bias and how it may impact how we support marginalized students. We're going to do a little case study to get us in the mindset of where we're at in life right now. And if we were to have a major race incident happen in our school, how would it feel? Be in the moment. What's the setting? And then we're going to talk through some tools to send you on your way to do this work, to support students in schools around their, if you have a major racial incident. So some of this is going to take some you development and knowing for yourself, like what areas do I need to develop myself on? Some of it's going to be understand our current climate we're in, COVID-19, as a pandemic, and it's impacted our entire country. And so also part of this training is going to be around response, understanding the response for a real crisis. It's not a matter of if this happens at your school, it's when. And it's going to look a lot different now that we have COVID and students are on technology more. So we have to come in prepared, especially with everything that's gone on recently. We have to know how to prepare for race incidents in our schools. And our students need us. Their brains aren't fully developed. Our staff need us. Many of them don't know how to have these conversations. So that's why we're here today. So let's do it. Let's buckle up. Let's have some fun learning and growing together. So some opening thoughts. Take a moment and reflect. We're in that reflecting of ourselves as we're thinking about what are your values for how you treat people? What are your values? What do you go by for you personally? What do you go by for how you treat people? Where did you learn it from? And then also, what are the values of family or culture, or of your family or culture of origin? I share this because I know family unit is a major connection piece, especially for us, people of color, our area that we grew up in, our culture of origin. All those factors contribute to how we connect with people. Faith is a huge lens that many people of color lean into for how to treat others. So as you think about where you pull up your values from, think about all those aspects. And I know for me, it's around showing people love. I value loving people, caring about them, treating others how I would like to be treated. If someone needs help, lean in and give them help. If I see someone being treated poorly, step in. It takes a village. Those are some of the things I think about when I think about values, how to love people unconditionally, offer grace, be kind to people, even if you don't know them. Those are some of the top values that I have. You all have your own, and you know where you draw from them, where you get them from. Be mindful of that as we're doing this, because that is ultimately going to influence how you show up and respond when race incidents go down in your school. So why in the world do we need to have this talk about major race incidents or hate and bias incidents in school? Why is it important? We all know, and first of all, it impacts students' achievement. All the data poured on us that we see all the time talks about the gaps, the education gap, the achievement gap, the opportunity gap. And with those already present gaps, if you have a race incident in your school, that disrupts learning. That puts students of color behind already to have to navigate race incident in school, which should be their safe space, and while trying to learn and capture the information, trying to do organic chemistry and trying to navigate a major racial incident at school is hard, it's challenging. Next is your school environment. Those of you who have been in a school that has a diverse student population and you've experienced major race incidents, you know how much that really polarizes the school at times, whether it's staff members that don't know how to respond or you're feeling as a person of color in the environment that you're in. And then imagine the students not knowing, can we talk about this, or having teachers tell them, oh, we don't talk about this here. And then you got high school kids, next to social emotional learning, understand we're dealing with technology. and students are feeling real hurt and pain from what other students are posting on social media. Their brains are not fully developed to understand how to have use social media in a productive way. And you see a lot of the recent race incidents connected to technology use. And so how they're interpreting news and media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, CNN, Fox, TikTok. So we gotta make sure that we're helping to develop our kids in their social emotional capacity. As school counselors, this is an area of student social emotional development that we have not made a definitive connection around. A student's race impacts the lens they see, how they're socialized every day, and how they feel emotionally. That's why we have to see this issue of race, this topic of race, the beauty of race, I say, as a social emotional area that we have to teach students more about and help them learn more about themselves and the world that they're in. We have students graduating every day who have not had a real conversation about race, privilege, bias, and these are high school kids. Heck, we have people graduating from college who have never had real, down, authentic conversations around race and how it impacts them, how they react when someone talks about race and the natural defensiveness that comes up. So I think it's important for us as school counselors to teach these skills, help students build their social emotional capacity to have conversations about race. And then next, we gotta be mindful of the continued system of oppression. Just even the fact that we are just now moving into addressing race openly. Probably many of us are just having conversations in mixed race company about race for the first time. I know some white colleagues, it's unique that they're now having to bring up the topic of race. And so I think we gotta stay mindful of the system of oppression around race. And usually what happens is people just don't do anything about it, and then we realize this will keep happening. It's systemic. So we don't have the chance to, we don't want to sit in the position where we don't address it. So now we're in a situation where we can make real honest change as we navigate our roles as school counselors and having conversations around race. So I want you to take a second. This is Minnesota now. So now we're getting into the meat of this. This is Minnesota since 2016. Race hate incidents in our state. And this is, goodness, not even full 4 years ago. Take a look at it. These are the ones that made the news, that were actually reported, that you actually saw or heard about. So take a look. Look at the nature of it, how it happens. I know some of it happens online. Some of it happens in person. It can be students, it can be staff. And I think be mindful of how this news lands on you, because race is connected to trauma and our bodies and our minds, and knowing how these race, especially for us as people of color, imagine students of color, how this is landing on them. And this is happening in schools throughout the country. I share about Minnesota because this is where I'm way more knowledgeable about and see and hear in our local news. And we know these are, there's incidents that happen on the national news. But we're talking about school, in the actual school building. These are some of the incidents, just a snapshot, very snapshot, major race hate bias incidents in Minnesota since 2016. Some of you probably are thinking about your own state and things that you've seen happen that are similar. All right, so as we get started, I want us to just even hear a case. So one of those cases you saw in there was the first one, the top one, Maple Grove Middle School. And so we're gonna watch a video of it, because just getting yourself in the mindset when these race incidents happen, how do they unfold and how to get yourself prepared and how do you feel? So we're gonna watch a quick video of one that happened at Maple Grove Middle School. It's a school here in Minnesota, about 25 minutes away from Minneapolis, and they experienced a major race incident. My buddy Caleb, right here, he's a school counselor there. Shout out to my guy Caleb. There's very few of us male school counselors of color in Minnesota, and so it's just awesome that to have him to connect with. But let's check out this case and debrief, just slowly, just do a quick case study so you can see what it feels like when race incidents occur. So, and this is here in Minnesota. Come on, screen, there we go. All right.
I used to dread when my daughter would take off her shoes in the car because of the dead rat smell, but after the second day of using Lumi.
And we start tonight with a violent video that has parents in one metro school district demanding answers.
One mother tells us it's her daughter in this video being attacked at Maple Grove Middle School last month. First on 5 tonight, Jay Coles was there as parents pressed the Osseo Maple Grove School Board to act.
Paul, some of the parents here tonight expressed anger over what they say is a rise in student assaults and student bullying. Now, there were other parents who stood up and said they were the parents of children who've been accused of wrongdoing, and they defended their children. Now, the video from inside Maple Grove Middle School is not that easy to watch, but the victim's mother says she wants the public to see what happened to her daughter. Erin Schindler says she found video of her daughter's assault on social media and then showed it to me on her phone.
We were horrified. When they said there was an assault at the school, we had no idea that's what they meant by an assault.
Schindler says 2 girls attacked her daughter in a hallway at Maple Grove Middle School in December. Schindler says her daughter suffered multiple bruises and abrasions after more than 24 punches and kicks to her upper body. And she's not happy, she says, about what she says was a 4-day suspension for the 2 attackers.
Parents have been complaining about the environment at the school for quite a long time, and it's time for change.
And other parents told the school board their children have been threatened and bullied at Maple Grove Middle School as well.
I was astonished by how many kids don't feel safe at our middle school.
Then 2 parents stood up in the packed meeting and defended their children, saying their children have been accused of being aggressors without the whole story. They say their daughters acted in self-defense and were provoked by racial slurs and discrimination.
You want to have her deal with that kind of ridicule on a constant basis? I'm sorry, but I think you might see a little bit of anger come out at some point, and it did.
Yeah, shake your head. You want to expel the child from a district from getting an education? It's a 13-year-old.
Please keep your attention up here, please. Direct it to the board. Thank you.
Whoever, it's a 13-year-old child.
Now, the Osseo Maple Grove superintendent did thank parents for coming tonight. He told them he could not comment on specific cases, but he did say that they are already working on solving some of these issues. Reporting live in Maple Grove, Jay Coles, 5 Eyewitness News.
All right. I'm going to turn this off before it keeps playing out there. All right. So you heard the story, just in summary, talking about white female student was attacked by 2 African-American female students. The incident was recorded and shown on social media. The students received 4 days of suspension. The parents of the white student want to see more action from the school staff about the school environment because they say these things have been happening. Also, there was a school board meeting and school family members in the community of color shared that they've been experiencing, the students have been experiencing racial slurs at school as well. So this is a snapshot of a situation, and this situation could happen to any of our schools at any moment. Think to yourself, has anyone here had that experience at a school or heard about a school that experienced a major race or discriminatory incident? As you think about these situations, think about it. What was the case, or even this one? How do you think students, staff, and the community are responded to? Are they responded? For those of you who've had this happen, was there a response? What was communicated to them? And then I think the main thing is considering, and feel free, would you feel prepared right now? Would you feel your building's prepared? Would you be prepared to navigate a major racial incident if it was to happen at your school? All right, so before we dive into all of this, oh, it won't let me share my screen or show myself. So before we dive into this, it's so important to know about yourself. Know that we're going to be doing a lot of diving into understanding ourselves and growing ourselves if we're going to be able to have these conversations, because it's so important to know how we're showing up when we're in these situations, how we arrive. And so I think it's important to step back, and I know many of us have heard of some of these terms and experienced it, but I think it's so important for us to be aware of our own race and understanding racism, understand our own biases, and then also understanding privilege. Because when we're working with students, if we're going to better support them through a major racial incident, we have to know how we are showing up. Many people in your building will be in the same position to offer support, but not everyone's going to support. And I think especially thinking about us as people of color in a building, our students are going to be looking to us. They feel and know we just have that unspoken agreement where it's like, hey, I'm going to go talk to my, and hopefully we're building those kind of relationships where students know I can go talk to my school counselor of color about these race issues. So we have to be mindful of our understanding around these things. First is understanding race. Just at its purest form, knowing that it's designed to justify social inequities. It's at its physical nature, is your skin tone, your physical attributes. And then, so taking those things and putting it into compartments, race, and then giving certain races more value than the other race. And it's not just white, black. I think being mindful that us as people of color, there's sometimes we do the same thing. We treat people of other races. It might not be someone's that is of color like African American. I treat them not as without bias. I might be treating someone who's Asian or someone who's Somali. So we have to be mindful of how that racism plays out. And that racism is at any time we're devaluing someone's race, not as valuable as our own. So I think be mindful of the history of racism in our country and the systems. And it impacts people of color of all backgrounds. So I'll give you just a brief snapshot of how it's impacted African Americans in our country. African Americans were brought over to our country, many as slaves. And I hate just sharing the negative pieces because there's so much beauty in the strength of people who are, and resilience for people of color in our country, and especially immigrants. And I hate to even consider like an immigration as a forceness, but the resilience of people when they leave their native land and go to another country is so huge. It's been studied. And so I think it speaks to the strength of people of color in our country is preserving. So 150 years our country endured slavery. Laws were in place that don't allow voting after that don't allow owning a home, or if you live somewhere, it has to be in a certain neighborhood. There's been segregation in our country. Many people alive, if you're in your mid to upper 60s and up, you were alive during segregation. So I think we need to be mindful. This wasn't long ago. And so, and also we have to realize that some of these things led to bias. And that bias is just knowing the attitudes and stereotypes that affects our actions, how we understand events and how they happen. So major racial incident, if you have bias, it's gonna show up. So being mindful of our bias, I gotta be honest, I have experienced times where I've had bias. And these are different types. Race-based bias, where you treat someone differently because of their race. And then also, I think thinking about it, when you're walking in the hallways, if it's race-based bias, when you're walking by certain areas of the hall, are you more biased to think about telling that student to go to class or not based on their race? I know our students of color have been sharing for the longest that they feel that happens in schools where teachers target them. So we have that kind of bias. Also, course selection bias. That's how it shows up in schools. Just even the belief that we have in students. And I had to catch myself, am I mindful of my beliefs for students? Does it differ based on their race? We can't have those kind of human errors. School counselors, data review bias. So there's a long list of bias that we have as school counselors that we really need to work on. Course scheduling bias. So we have to be mindful of that. Also be mindful of our privileges. We all have privileges. And so being mindful of how our privileges show up, and especially if we're supporting students from underrepresented populations, we have to be aware of how, for me, it hit me in the face this year, being aware of our students that are Asian American and how they were experiencing racism this year during COVID. And having to realize in that moment, Asian Americans were experiencing bias and discrimination. In that moment, as odd as it sounds, I had the privilege of not experiencing that kind of bias based on race that was connected to the coronavirus. So Asian Americans were experiencing a lot of targeting and discrimination, but I wasn't because I'm African American. But with that privilege, I don't need to just sit there and not speak up if I see that it's impacting our Asian American students and my Asian American coworkers and friends. I need to lean into my privilege and say, hey, how can I speak up and make sure that we make sure that our Asian American friends are being taken care of? So that's some of the work we have to do when we do realize we have a privilege. I have privileges as someone that's tall. I have privilege as a man. So I have to stand in those gaps where I know I have a privilege and speak up because I don't want to sit there silent. We all know what our privileges are. Speak up. We have to, because when a major incident happens at your school, you're going to have to push against the feeling in your gut like, ooh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or should I speak up? Man, I know how they are here. Speak up. So that's just how counseling, bias, privilege appears in school counseling. Yeah, even down to hiring practices. And I think a lot of us as people of color, we've experienced the racism, the bias in hiring, my goodness. And just being one of the few people of color in school building, that's other ways systemically that race, bias, and privilege shows up in school counseling. So, and even the training, how often does it not come up to address issues for students of color? So we got to start calling these things out in school counseling. If we're going to make the field a better place, and if we're going to better prepare ourselves for supporting students against these major race incidents, we have to start addressing these biases in school counseling. Tell our department. So those are some of the things to be mindful of that we can work on. So now as you reflect to yourself, if you're in that situation, you had a major racial incident happen at your school, just like the one we just saw now at Maple Grove Middle School, what bias, privilege, or messaging from your past might you have to address? I'll tell you what, if I'm gonna be raw with y'all, if I was in that situation, I would have to be mindful, especially as a African-American working with a student and families of different backgrounds. I gotta be mindful not to take sides and be biased and naturally think, oh, I gotta side with the students of color. I need to make sure to listen and hear students and build them up and help them navigate this situation and understand the social, emotional components of it and the consequences. But I need to make sure that I don't have a bias, because I'll be honest, I've seen so many times where students of color, and I've had in my own life, where I haven't felt heard when I raise the concern that something's going on at school. But I'll have to make sure I hear the students and offer them genuine support. And then also we have to be mindful of the white students. Yeah, that's the hard part, where I'd have to be mindful of the white student and be like, hey, that bias incident, the thing that you said or did, I can't hold a grudge against that student. So I have to check my heart. Where's my heart on this? To really do that straightforward work with students. Make sure you take a stance when you're talking with colleagues, because you know when these incidents go on, you can only imagine that building, what people are saying in these little corner pockets. And I'll share with you a little bit the race incident I had to navigate when I was at Champlain Park High School. But how will you speak to families? How will you speak to students and people in your community around the incident? Will you be quiet about it? Will you be shy? Or will you speak up and say, hey, here's some things we need to work on. Here's what's going on. Here's how we can heal and get better. A lot of people don't want to talk about these race incidents, but we have to go into it seeing it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Our students need it. Think about also professionally, when you have these incidents come up, what are some proactive school-wide activities your team can do right away in the moment to support your students? How would you respond to students in individual counseling sessions, especially students who may not have an understanding about some of these different components and why, how the words hurt, racial words hurt. And what are potential small groups you can do to get things going to have the conversation in the aftermath of a race incident? So before I go into strategies, I want to share with you all that just a little bit about myself. When I went to Champlain Park High School, I attended high school there. I ain't gonna tell you how long ago, but just say it was in the 2000s. So I went to Champlain Park High School, and I ended up working at Champlain Park High School before I came back to Minneapolis as in my current role. And during my time at Champlain Park, it's a unique dynamic. 3,000 students in the school. The staff is predominantly white. And I think we had out of the 140 staff, maybe licensed staff, maybe I'll say 8. I was one of 2 licensed African-American, people in the building, because it was me and 1 teacher. And so that's the background setting of the building that I was working at. And so I knew many of the teachers because I was there. I had been there as a student, had them for classes or coaches. And the breakdown racially for the school is 60% white, 40% students of color. I believe it was about 20% African-American, 20% Asian. And then the rest was a combination of students who were Latinx and American Indian. So that's the demographic of the school. It was very diverse, beautiful place. I love being able to have conversations with students from so many different backgrounds. And I love being able to talk about race, especially with students and families who that wasn't their thing. They didn't grow up doing that. There's so many parents where they'd be like, you know what, this is something, I'd be talking to their kids about race. The parents would be like, I'm glad that you brought it up. We don't talk about this at home in our living room. So I say, hey, I'm just putting it out there. It's a skill that your kid, we all can use talking about this. So we had a major racial incident at Champlain Park. You can see it there, the volleyball team on their way to a game. There's a student who recorded herself using social media, and she said the N-word, which was in a verse to a song. And it made social media, made the news, and that hit our school hard. It hit me hard personally. It hit the students hard. And so I share this story with you because some of the strategies I'm going to share are things that we did and also things I wish we had done that I was able to see get done in other schools and in other settings when I had major racial incidents come up. And so that's what this next part's going to be around, just sharing those strategies. But I think it's important that we connect with the students, especially be mindful of our students of color. And that student right there is Sydney. And her and I, she knew she was going to be in this. She told me, yes, she graduated. She's at Augsburg. So for folks making sure to get consent, I got you. And so she was not on my caseload. And that's the other thing, as counselors of color, when we're working with students, make sure that that we're visible, that students from all backgrounds know and see you and feel your presence and know they can connect with you. So just making sure that we're there for our students, we take a stance, we let them know how we're supporting them, and be ready to reconcile the relationships that do sometimes get harmed when race incidents happen in your school. Before that, it's important though, we're talking about race incidents, but it can be a variety of other incidents that happen in your school that are not race. It could be a student with political affiliation. Let's be honest, we're in a day and age where in COVID, with social media, there's an election year coming up. We need to make sure we're supporting students regardless of how they and their families vote. Same with religious beliefs, abortion, immigration. We have to be unconditional in our care to students and make sure that we're drawing near to students and providing that support. Also, let's do this work from a cultural humility stance. Cultural competence tells folks, you know what, I went to this training, or I'm assuming I have enough knowledge on my own, or I've reached a level of understanding where I don't need to keep growing. I took that 3-credit class in grad school, so I know everything about cultural diversity. We can't think like that. Or I lived in this neighborhood, so I understand these things because of the neighborhood I lived in, I grew up in. I think it's so important to have that cultural humility perspective of, you know what, this is a lifelong process. When these things happen, I need to make sure that I'm open to learning and supporting students and hearing where people are coming from. And that at times, you know what, I might get this wrong, and I need to see it as a journey. that I need to offer myself forgiveness and ask for help and move forward. So that's how we learn about other students and their pain when they're navigating race incidents. We have to come at it from humility. I don't know what it's like to be treated differently as an Asian American person in our country during coronavirus. I don't know. I didn't learn that in grad school. But you know what? I can start reading, I can ask, I can build my knowledge up and have the humility to say, I need to learn because I want to support students so that when they have things happen, I can make sure they know I'm here for them. Here are some examples of how humility sounds. These are things that I say with students when I'm working with them so that they know, as we're talking about what's going on, if it's around race, if it's about sexual orientation, if it's about culture, if it's about language of origin, I want them to know, hey, at any point, I want to learn and listen and make sure that I'm not getting this wrong. I want to understand I might make mistakes. Or I say, to be honest, I've not had that environment that you're talking about. Those are ways to inquire instead of putting any of our judgments on things. Inquire, learn. Students love sharing about their experience, and we need to help them share their cultural experience, their racial experience, not just the good parts, the hard parts too. And using humility helps to draw them out, because we don't, especially for students and peers who don't have the same racial cultural background as us, we can't just assume. We have to ask and have humility. So now we're getting into the meat of this. So we talked about if you had a major racial incident happen at your school, what would you do? How would you handle it? Please don't wait for admin to figure it out, because I promise you, a lot of admin folks might not know exactly how to start. You might be sitting there like, man, let's just, one of the things that stress me out when people are like, let's just wait and see what admin does. We're school counselors. This is our work. We can do this. So it's really important for us to plan in advance. Just like people plan for fire drills, you do those 3 times a year. You plan for, goodness, for tornado drills. Now we even plan for active shooter drills in schools. Those are all things that people do proactively. We have a higher likelihood that major racial or bias incidents are going to happen in our school. So we have to start preparing for it. And it's not like a preparing in a scared way. It's more like teach the skills for the kids so that they understand how we navigate this. How do we talk about this? We shouldn't have it be a fire drill or fire every time race comes up. It'd be like, hey, how can we handle this? There are healthy ways to have those conversations and teach that, and the school plays a huge role. So I'm going to be talking about preventative, proactive steps, but also in the moment strategies here moving forward. So first things first, create an emergency plan, just like you do a fire drill. When you're planning and in your school planning, if you're thinking about fire drill, oh yeah, we got fire drill planning. Talk about, hey, what's our response to a major race or hate bias incident? Do it annually. Do those trainings annually where you go and get actual support and training around having conversations with students from different backgrounds for your own growth, but also so that you're able to have those connections and experiences for your staff. Because we all know we work in a building with staff who struggle around this kind of stuff. So make it a part of your team. Put it in your counseling team notes that y'all gonna talk about it. I remember working at Champlain Park, our team, no one wanted to bring it up. We sat around the table. I had teammates that were sitting there like, let's wait for admin to tell us what to do. I'm telling you, especially as a person of color, hearing that, it hurt. It stung. I was like, y'all, I'm struggling with this race incident going on at school. I don't want to wait for admin. Our kids don't want us to wait for admin. They want to talk about it now. So have a plan so that you're not reacting when a race incident happens at your school. You're proactive. You have a plan, and you already talked about it. Be mindful of your school environment. All of us know how our schools are, where we're located, what part of the country we're in, how the majority feels, thinks, believes, how people are treated. Be mindful of your school and past situations you've had happen. There's so much of this that happens where we don't even know kids are experiencing racism and bias and hearing some really hurtful things. So if we aren't aware of how kids are navigating and talking to each other, then we're going to miss out on opportunities to teach them how to proactively speak better to each other, engage with empathy, and know what words hurt. So know who's the marginalized folks at your school. How can you recognize them and celebrate them? Make sure they feel included. Hear about their backgrounds. What do your hallway conversations look like? Are your hallways segregated? So be mindful that schools in America, segregation, goodness, our country separated kids intentionally by school. My dad went to a segregated elementary school. So now we have to do the work of integrating people back in and having inclusion. So we'll look at how it looks in the hallway. That's on us as school counselors. How are we helping them socialize? Social media, oh my goodness. That is huge, especially in distance learning right now. Be mindful of what kids are putting out there on social media. What's trending? What tools are they using? Because a lot of these race incidents are happening on social media where kids don't have the fully functioning brain understanding to know that what I post on social media really will land and hit someone emotionally and impact triggers of things they've had happen. So we have to be honest with students about how words impact them virtually, their digital presence. And then again, for us as schools, what are we doing in advance? What have we done as far as lessons in schools to have students begin to explore their own personal bias and understand what discrimination is, what it feels like, how to embrace people from different backgrounds and see it as a benefit, a plus, instead of seeing it as something that separates us. It has to be anti-racism work we're doing in the schools. This isn't going to just happen by people being around each other. We've been around people of different backgrounds for years, this whole time. And so you have to be mindful that as we're around people of different backgrounds, how are we having these conversations so that we can have a better, healthy community? Speaking of the community, what organizations in your community that represent populations that have traditionally been marginalized, how are you connecting with them? I know that's something when I was at Champlain Park, we started doing after we had major racial incidents. We started connecting and having forums and spaces for parents from underrepresented populations to come and speak and talk about what their kids' experience has been like at that school and what their experience has been like as a parent. How are we having those conversations? And then we all know about this piece. Your school's got to start setting it up where they're hiring more counselors of color, staff of color, to not for us to do all the work. It's more for understanding our students and being an ear and having our antennas up for how to support our students from underrepresented populations. So now, some other just outright suggestions to be mindful of when the situation comes for having a race incident in your school. First things first, and we're all noticing this, especially with the George Floyd situation here in my hometown, Minneapolis. Actually having the conversation, that's got to be your starting point. That's something that as a counseling department, you have to figure out how are we going to talk about this and how are we going to facilitate conversations with the school, with our kids. When you have a race incident, you got to have a conversation as a team, checking how folks are doing. Also, though, remember, your students are curious. This is new for them. It's sad, but race conflict publicly in a school setting, that's new for them. A lot of students, it's really uncomfortable, and they're going to be curious. So we need to listen to them. Be understanding of what it feels like for the students, especially students from underrepresented population. I pour my heart in thinking, how are my Black and brown students feeling right now with this race incident? I care about how my white students feel as well, but I make sure, because I know the emotional trauma when race bias incidents happen really hits students of color heavily. I'm mindful, what would that feel like if I'm going to school here and that happened? Or a classmate said that. They're in my class. I know who they are. Be mindful of that. And assure them it's okay not to always know all the answers, and that humans make mistakes. We make mistakes. I've made mistakes. And teach them how to be advocates. That's important for us as school counselors of color working with white students. I think it's important that we're able to have these conversations, because there are so many white students out there that I've worked with that once we have the conversation, they come to a realization around some of these things. They're like, I want to work on this. I want to move forward. I want to support this kind of work. So now we're getting into the nuts and bolts kind of things of school counseling on how you support your school before a major racial incident, and if you have a major racial incident happen. And so I want to be mindful that I will have this information in a handout that you'll have that gives a summary. So I'll make sure to get that over to the conference organizers, and so that you have just a little bit of a guideline around what would you do. And so first thing first, if you have a major race incident happen at your school, it's imperative, it's important that first of all, you have something in your school handbook before the school year even begins, where you're talking about race, where you're talking about discrimination, bias, hate based on race. School have handbooks and they talk about bullying and all that. It needs to be explicitly addressed how you would navigate, or how students need to make sure that they're that's important to your school, not to discriminate students based on their racial background. Make it in the lesson that you do when you're going through your handbook. Don't just guide over it. Also, it's important to do classroom lessons that tie in conversation around racism and bias and privilege, because a lot of students, they're not having these conversations organically at home or with and then all their classes. And this is a social emotional piece that as school counselors, we can help support them around. So talk about it. I know we're doing a lesson around identity and helping students understand how their identity is perceived in the world as they're navigating it. Which ones seem more, they feel people see more in their school, which one's affirmed and which one's not affirmed, because that helps with that identity development and knowing how students are showing up in school. Make sure that you're incorporating race in your social emotional learning. Have photos, books, videos, college options that represent students from various backgrounds. Those are ways to build the culture of your school around talking about race and culture and ethnicity, so that when things come up, your students aren't freaking out around, oh man, this is gonna be horrible to talk about. You already laid the foundation of, oh yeah, in school we do talk about race and racism and what it feels like, and embrace people of different backgrounds. Next is making sure that you're creating small groups. So if you have a major race incident happens, you're gonna make sure proactively that you're doing lessons in your school so that students can feel that support. If the event happens where you have a race incident, you're doing a lesson, a check-in lesson. I'll share that as well, where you're seeing with students, how is this situation impacting you? What are some general emotions you're feeling after this race incident? Students will feel a lot of the pain and triggers, and some students will need a space to put that out. Next is a small group. Those are ways you can help students process when race incidents happen. Race incidents hit students differently, depending on what things are more triggers for them. And so it's really important to create small groups right after the event happens, where you let students know, hey, we had some incidents happen in school. We're going to create a small group space. And that's information you can share when you do the lessons. After the incident happens at your school, you can say, you know what? We're actually going to create a small group for people who want to continue this conversation and grow and figure out ways to make this school environment more inclusive. That's something you can do. And then also, I really encourage you, before the school year even starts, have a small group where you have students come in and you say the whole purpose of the group is to learn about people from different cultures and backgrounds and identities, what hurts, what feels good. Because if you have that small group, if you have that class lesson, and then you open up the opportunity for students to connect in a small group, that's how you build in those natural points and use that to help your school environment have places, spaces to have conversation around race and identity and feel valued and built up at school on who they are. Your times can be during lunch, before, after school. I did mine during lunch, and it was awesome. And I also participated in one that was after school. And it's awesome, and especially in those groups, we need to be mindful, especially as counselors of color, is that it's not a space where we're bashing white people. I'm just gonna be honest, because sometimes students come into it and it's like, oh, did you hear about this person? We gotta make sure students are growing and learning about how to navigate these conversations, because sometimes our students aren't crazy. They're smart. They see a lot of these things play out, and it's hard for them to process and not feel the hurt And so we have to help students realize, you know what, that's an area of growth for that student here at school that said that, or for even our staff, and helping them know, like, you know, what was said or what happened isn't right. But here in our group, let's talk about ways we can be positive and help people come along this journey as well. So then the next part is having individual counseling sessions with students. What I realize is when you have race incidents happen at your school, there'll be students who, there's students that I never had met or worked with in our building that were coming over to talk about some of these incidents. Students were finding their peers in the building like, hey, I just went and talked to Mr. Francis about the race stuff that went on. Do you want to come with me and talk with him about it? And so be mindful of offering support to students individually, because there's a lot of students who you don't know or hear about how they're being triggered by the race incidents. And I started realizing as students would come in of all backgrounds, they kind of want to bring it up, but they didn't know, like, can I bring it up? Usually my students of color knew. They're like, hey, let's talk about this. Did you see what happened? Because we had built that foundation of talking about race. So my students, and it was also my white students that I was closer to, and built a solid relationship. They came in it from an angle of like, you know what, I want to learn. I want to understand. Help me, but tell me more about this. And it was beautiful being able to have that relationship where we have these individual counseling times with students, and they open up and we open up. And I think it's a gift that we offer our students as educators of color, that we're helping them on this journey. Not like we have to do all the work, but students look at us and we have a certain level of understanding where even students have told me, they're like, I know you just get it, Mr. Francis. I don't gotta tell you. You know, you see what's going on. And students who even are not even on our caseloads, we have to say, you know what? I walked into the school and I said, we got 3,000 kids. I'm assigned to 500, but all students here, especially students of color, they're mine. I'm your counselor too. I'm checking up on you, making sure you're not messing up or acting up because I care about you. So that's the way I started approaching school. I see it as, you know what, a lot of you have never had a man of color in your school to support you and be here like this in a professional role and look out for you. I'm doing it for all of you because I never really had that at all when I was growing up. So that's how we have to see this, and then also see our white students and our students who are more in the dominant position as, you know what, how can I pour into you this opportunity to grow and learn from people of different backgrounds? You probably haven't had someone at your house of a different race or background. I don't know if your family members have friends that are of color, but you know what? I'll be that person. Undo some of the thoughts and things that maybe are question marks for you. So I think it's important to see this as different supports based on the student's background. So students who are more marginalized, we need to make sure that we acknowledge that they're hurt. That's the number one thing students of color share with me, that they've went to talk to other teachers and after the major race incident, and they didn't listen. They started offering just blanket solutions. Some didn't even acknowledge that it happened in the classroom. So we have to check in on those students. I had a student who, the student that said something was suspended was sitting right next to them. And they went and told their counselor, hey, can I just get my seat moved? I'm fighting these triggers in my mind about what that student did on social media. And that's where we even have peers who don't realize that student's telling you how they're really feeling. We need to hear them and move the kid's schedule, move the kid around the class, or work with them to address that trigger. We gotta affirm our students for being brave and bold in our world to speak up against race incidents, to talk about their feelings connected to it. We don't have enough spaces for that, space for students to address the trauma from race issues that they experience. Also, we want to be open about not fully understanding how to navigate the situation, how it's going to play out in the school. Students usually want answers. So what's going to happen next? Who's going to get in trouble? How long are they going to be suspended? I usually tell students, you know what? I don't fully understand what's going to happen next. I don't fully understand how things are going to be and how you're going to feel navigating, but I'm here to support you. I want to try to understand. I have the humility to try to understand your situation. Also, we need to make sure we're validating the student's value in your school. When race incidents happen, kids sometimes think, especially kids of color, is this school for me? Man, let me go back to the other school that has more kids of color. Or let me just, is this really where I want to be? And especially because we know a lot of times students of color, race-based trauma triggers us. I say us because I've had it happen at school. So I'm like, man, with all these things going on, is this the school? When I was working at Champlain Park, I had to ask myself, is this the school I want to be working at still? With all these race incidents popping off. I think it's important to be mindful of the needs of our students who are more privileged in the dominant position of situations. And I didn't put white there because, again, there's so many of those situations where it's not even race-based that I've seen go down in our school around fights and discrimination and bias. So be mindful of students who find themselves in the privileged position to understand the skills for supporting their friends or their peers, teaching them how to talk through their feelings. I had white students share with me like, oh, I feel so guilty. I don't want our school to be looked at like that. I didn't know kids here were feeling or experiencing these kind of racist acts in school. Answer their curious questions. And that part was hard for me at first, where I'd be like, this student keep coming to ask me all these questions. Ask somebody else, go read a book. But I think the graceful way to do that is to let the students know, hey, I'm going to share some of my experience, but maybe read about how it feels, maybe watch movies, maybe have conversations with friends of different backgrounds to see how they're feeling. And I think really important to teach that empathy. I think that's the gateway to doing this and seeing the humanity across races, across background. I think that's what's really going to help bring this full circle and healing. Also, is important. We got to engage with the community, and that's one thing that the community reached out when I was at the school that had the major race incident, and the families literally would. And you know how it's an unspoken agreement that I started to notice with families of color, where parents would just look and know and say, you know what, I have a feeling you are looking out for our kids. You're a person of color here. Thank you for speaking. Thank you for being here. Thank you for representing. And so as staff of color, we got to be mindful of how we're reaching out to our communities. We need to take it on ourselves to say, you know what, we want to stay engaged with the communities of color, find times to create space to bring them in, parent nights, where it's, and not just having a meal, not just let's just do a dinner, do it where you learn about the cultures, all of it, not just the good parts, not just at the big holiday times either. We have to do that kind of work. Because the families know, they know who cares and who else are back, just like the kids know. And so we have to be intentional around how our school is supporting the community, especially our marginalized communities. So the other piece too around supporting your community, have a family night, a parent night, where you talk about race. You talk about the racial climate in your school. And then you also give parents some tips for how to talk to their kids about race. I think it's so imperative because most parents don't know what to say, and a lot of them are scared to say the wrong thing. And then also being mindful that people of color talking about race comes way more natural for us. So we got to figure out times that we can help our families of different backgrounds start to have those conversations with their kids. So as we begin to wrap up, and I'm going to continue to speak to my people of color, because this space is designed for us to push and move forward as we do this work. And I know it can be hard. We're in the midst of the coronavirus. We're in the midst of historic racial events. We're all trying to plan how to get back to school. So as we're doing this work, we carry a lot of stress. And that's why I put on here, we have to take care of ourselves. We're navigating a lot. Race-based trauma is real. And so you have to make sure you take care of yourself. Also, we have to be mindful of offering grace. This can be hard because I know, myself included, I've experienced a lot of stress and triggers from race situations. And when you have major racial incidents happen at school or in society, it can be easy to call out or want to attack people who haven't really done this work before, who are new to it, and I think it's usually because we're like, man, you would hope there's a certain level of understanding of this that people would speak up or know how to respond. And not everyone's there yet. It takes time. But what we can't do is go around pushing bias right back out by calling our white peers Karens and Beckys. We got to be mindful of that, because that's not supportive. That's divisive. And I know some people hearing this might take offense or not feel comfortable hearing that. But I'm speaking to you, and if you're not feeling comfortable when I say that, I think you got to be mindful. If you call someone a Karen who's trying their hardest to understand, or even deciding to try to understand some of these race pieces, understand how bias and microaggression work, it's not going to help. It's not going to help doing this work in isolation or being divisive. And so be mindful that we're not labeling and stamping people who haven't understood how to do this work. We need to come alongside and build bridges, build connections. If you have a better understanding around this, invite your colleagues to listen to some stuff, engage in conversation, but then build a bridge. Say, how can I, it looks like you're wanting to understand some of this. How can I support you? No, it's not on us as people of color to carry the burden and do all the work, but I think we can find the grace in our heart to say, you know what, if I have a peer that's looking to do this work and trying, how can I support them? How can I be a teammate with them? So next is you got to lead boldly. You have to lead boldly. And the reason I say this is because when you have a major race incident happening at your school, or if you're the only, regardless of if you're the only person of color, you have some other ones, it can be hard because the systems that are in place right now don't lend themselves to a protocol for handling race incidents in the best way. Most schools don't have a plan for doing this work. So if you're going to carry this work, be bold in it. Tell your team, hey, here's some, attend to the session, here's some stuff we can do just to even start, so that you don't have the incident happen and then y'all just look there like, oh, what do we do now? What should we think about doing? Plan for, you wouldn't do that. You knew there's a chance there could be a fire. You would plan in advance. Y'all got that fire extinguisher ready. You telling kids how to run out of there, what to do. Do the same for race incidents. Do the same. Let's not be scared to have these conversations. So it means being bold. And I know it's taking a toll on us as people of color, but we have to take care of ourselves and learn how to be strategic and bold in doing this work. Just some quick ASCA of equity. Let me just jump here, because y'all know ASCA. And ASCA is cool, but it has some things it needs to grow in. It needs to speak directly to how to help students socially and emotionally with addressing race. It needs to put that in its mindsets and habits and behaviors. If we're teaching empathy, we got to talk about students understanding racial empathy, about someone from a different background, that I'm listening and hearing them and understanding their perspective, not what I think they should be thinking or how I viewed life through my lens for people of color. Listen to this. We need to add that into ASCA mindsets and behaviors for our students to learn those skills. Here's ASCA of equity. I think you got to start asking these types of questions for your program. What we got? So I know we got a couple questions, so let me run to the questions because I don't want to miss out on anyone. I just been sitting here talking, and I see some of the questions, and I want to answer them and then call you all to a challenge of how to move this work forward. I love the first question. What are the thoughts on professional school counselors of color being the ones to lead discussions and training on racial issues for staff when they themselves are experiencing race-based incidents that historically have not been appropriately addressed by building admin? There's a culture where teachers feel unsupported and working with students on the topic of race. White teachers report they feel mute and addressed. Yeah, it's so true. I think it's so important for us as school counselors of color in our buildings to, we got to push admin. And when I say that, it's because most school districts attempt to put out there some type of statement saying that all students are included. We care about all students. All races and nationalities are embraced. Or they put out some type of equity statement. And so now we got to start pushing our admin to be real about it. It's not enough to just make that post or put it up there as a sticker to say, oh, we connect to everyone. We have this committee. We got to start holding them accountable and create these systems where we're talking about and validating and understanding people's different backgrounds and identities. Teachers, they need to be engaged in these trainings and sessions and hear ways to actually practice building relationships with students from different backgrounds and hearing their hurt and pain and not assuming they already know, or having the bias of if a student shows up to class late, now you got the stereotype, oh, they're all always late. Our teachers need that kind of support to know, how do I build relationships and actually have empathy and hear that student is hurting and these incidents are happening. That's on our leadership. So I'm pushing our district leadership to say, we have in our language, we say it's one of the pillars of our community. Why are we not building in times to have these conversations with students? Our staff of color are getting burnt out. The past how many amount of years, we know that these are things that are pressing our students and impacts their social, how they show up in school socially and how they feel emotionally. So we have to. So that's how I would address that. And then the next question is, how do you deal with students or families from the dominant group who are unapologetic or remorseful about racial bias they've done or racist things they've said? I'm so glad that question was asked, because those are things we're starting to see more of, where people will say things like, where they'll say stuff and they'll not want to take accountability for it. Or they'll say, well, they're just being too sensitive or too politically correct. Or, you know what, that's back in our day, that's how we just talked. Or why can they say that, but I can't? And so when people have those kind of comments and follow-ups, the way and this is something where it takes some relationship building. And I've had this happen one-on-one with parents and with, trust me, gets so, I got stories for y'all. So I think it's really important, the way I've done it is a conversation back to values. I always come back to, what are your values? What are your values? Do you value treating people with respect, with caring for each other? Do you value, if someone tells you they're hurting, that you don't want them to be hurting? Do you have friends, or do you know what their experience is like as a person from their background? And I understand that you may not have high regards for people of certain backgrounds, but that's going against your value of saying you treat all people with respect, treat all people how you'd like to be treated. So I usually share, like, well, then be true to your value of how to treat people and respect. But then also I share with them how important it is that they're setting an example. Your kids are watching. We have to be role models. If we want our community to be a healthier place, we have to be mindful of how those words are hurting other people in our community. And if we hear from people that they're saying it hurts, goodness, how can I put myself aside for one moment and understand also historically how this has hurt people from different backgrounds throughout their life? How can I have that empathy for real and not be stuck in how I think the situation's impacting you? I see we have one more. Another question. This is so important. Next too is, what do you do when the school is afraid of addressing this issue? They don't trust you as a school counselor to start this conversation with students, and how can you have parent buy-in? Yeah, that is it's so important, because oftentimes there is barriers. Even in the midst of a major racial incident, you'll have parents and community members who don't want to talk about race, who don't want certain things to be addressed because they have been in the pattern of running. A lot of, especially white families, when things like race come up, their initial response is, well, everyone's the same. Or they've been taught even since kids, oh, we don't want to talk about this. Or I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to seem like I'm a racist. So I think it's so important that, first of all, as a school, you build the culture of having these conversations. That's why you bring it up to them coming into the school. The other thing that I do as well in my lessons is let families know that the reason we're talking about this is because it's a college and career readiness skill too. our kids are going to leave high school, leave middle school, leave elementary school. But even before then, they're in an environment with kids from different backgrounds. And race is a huge piece of students' identity and people's identity that we know about. And so we need to take time to talk about it and not run away from it, especially if it's caused issues at our school. The next thing is being mindful that when they leave here, we want to prepare our students for a job in the future. You best believe there's going to be race incidents that happen at their job. We would rather that our kids learn these skills so that they can be more connected with the people that they work with and hold a job. No matter how smart you are, if you work at a company and you've never addressed the racist things that you say and you're doing it at work, it doesn't matter how good you are at your job. We see it all the time where people, and not just for your job, for humanity's sake and for connecting with people of different backgrounds, we want to make sure that we're having these conversations with them, making sure they feel connected. So that'd be one way that I'd say that we have. And then also a parent night. Have a night where you have parents engage in learning about how their kids are seeing and picking up messaging around race. I did a presentation for families where how to talk to your kids about race. And it talks about how kids are starting at 3 months old. Kids can already distinguish and categorize based on race. By 3 years old, kids are able to have bias based on race, even with who we might play. There's a certain point where kids are in the dilemma of who has the coolest toy to play with, but also who doesn't look like me. Should I play with them? Or I want to play, if I have to pick, I'll play with the person who looks more like me. So helping parents understand how their kids are growing up and racializing things in this world. So it's a benefit for them to have those conversations. And you know what? Some of them are going to have to end up doing some of that internal work of where'd Johnny get that from? Where did Quan get that from? Where did Quisha get that from? Where did Sarah get that from? We want parents to have these conversations, and they're just going to be scared. So thanks for asking those questions. I want to make sure. Someone asked how the situation shared for the case study was resolved. Was suspension the only thing done? From when I talked to my colleague that worked there, he shared that he helped to mediate conversation around what happened. He met as an African-American counselor, he did a lot of meetings with the white student and their family and the students of color. And and I was so glad to be someone to connect with him around it. But he talked about building the bridge for the students, because a lot of what was going on was some misunderstanding between the students. And then also some of what was going on is students not addressing comments that were said and perceived around race that the white student didn't know. It was landing on the students like that. So this is even more so reason why we have to have the conversation around, well, what words hurt? What things trigger? What things hurt people from different backgrounds that may not be seen as something that's hurtful for someone of a different background? You know, those are the things we got to talk about, so kids understand, like, oh, you don't like when that happens, or like, oh, like, and not just for people of different races, but individually be able to have space for kids to talk about that, but also be aware of the things culturally that certain cultures feel are disrespectful. We have to teach our students those things, because you think the world is diverse now? Oh my goodness, in the next 5 years, there's going to be way more people of color and different backgrounds and cultures, and that's a great thing. So we want to be in a world and society and country where we embrace it and support each other and want to learn from each other. And the best thing I've ever seen in my life is being connected to people from different backgrounds. It expands me, it grows us, and I want that for our kids too. So I believe we answered all 4 questions. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat. I think I see them now. I enjoyed hanging out with you guys. This was fun. I hope that you all were able to take something away. I see someone's here from Ivory Coast. I'm Liberian, half Liberian. So I said, how you doing? I'm happy to see you here. Thank you so much. And then I had a couple more things just to simply what did I say? Just my contact information I wanted to share in case people want to connect. I'm also on Twitter at Mr. I could put it in the chat piece too, huh? At Mr. Franchise 34. That's my Twitter. So if anyone wants to connect, talk more, get more PD stuff around this, I look forward to connecting. This is our work to do. Thank you, counselors, for checking this out. Here's some other upcoming events that I'll be participating in. So if you want to, the ASCA Town Hall coming up, I'll be on that. There's an ASCA article coming up. I'll be at the Minnesota School Counselors Association conference. There's a webinar for Character Strong. Also, I'll be at the Virginia School Counselors Association conference. I should have put that on here. And then I'm doing some work with California and Pennsylvania School Counselors Association around this very topic. So I am so excited to keep doing this work, and thank you all for connecting. I'll put my Twitter on here again. Oh yeah, I gotta get the handouts out here too. And there's gonna be a recording of this as well. So please feel free once the recording comes out, share it with your friends. And thank you.
So let me just say, Brother Derek, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us. And it was so informative. I hope it was really great for everybody else. I will wait for you to send me the presentation or whatever resources that you have, and I will make sure that it goes into the Google Drive for the virtual conference, which I'll put into the group. Let me see, is there anything else that I want to say? Yes, the video will go on YouTube probably between tomorrow and Friday. No, I'm sorry, Friday's my anniversary. So by Thursday the latest, it'll be up. Okay, so everyone have a blessed day. It is 12:30 a.m. in China. I'm going to my bed. And so Godspeed. Have a great night.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
Good night.